Masaru Igami is responsible for writing many of the Showa-era Kamen Rider shows and so many other tokusatsu series and anime, but behind these stories of truth and justice was a troubled man who struggled with alcoholism and his relationship with his family. Today we're going to be talking about Masaru Igami, the writer of many children's hero stories and the father of Toshiki Inoue. Igami was born on July 14, 1931 in Gunma Prefecture. He studied French literature in college and went to work at Senkosha, an advertising agency that was known for producing some of the earliest tokusatsu television series. While he grew up writing stories, what he didn't know was how talented he was in the field, until he submitted a script for a TV drama screenwriting contest hosted by Toshiba. The script, which he wrote in one night, was selected and dramatized as Planet Prince, the second in the series of TV heroes by Senkosha. This marked his debut as a screenwriter. As a screenwriter, he would go on to pioneer concepts in Japanese television that would have a long-lasting impact on pop culture as we know it. For example, have you ever seen ninjas on TV? Well, everything we find fascinating about fictional ninjas all start with Igami. When he was one of the main writers for The Samurai, another show produced by Senkosha, he made the concept of ninja more appealing than they really were. He made them sneak around, use ninja tools, and featured them fighting to the death, instead of making them just information gatherers. This work would then inspire many future stories about ninjas and set up what is known as the ninja boom. His work on The Samurai and other shows during this time period would eventually catch the attention of Toei producer Toru Hirayama, a producer known for helping bring to life the first Kamen Rider series and many other Toei programs in the 70s. Hirayama pulled a few strings and brought Igami on board to help write several of the series produced by Hirayama himself, the majority of them being the Kamen Rider series of course. Now what was so interesting about Igami's storytelling that made every television producer want to hire him? I believe the best person to answer that question is his own son Toshiki Inoue. According to Inoue, his father grew up watching kamishibai, or live storytelling with pictures. His enjoyment of the storytelling medium eventually made it into his script writing. Inoue, a writer himself, described Igami's scenarios as having a picture story show-like style, in which engaging scenes are enumerated without considering how the scenes would tie in together. Whatever the case, Igami was successful in helping usher in the henshin boom, or an era of transforming heroes in the tokusatsu medium, but the success of these shows is perhaps what led to his early death. While Igami has always been known to consume alcohol, he began to drink excessively while he got more writing jobs in the 70s, scripting a lot of shows during the henshin boom, where he found himself writing multiple scripts for different shows weekly. He was always on call. While he'd submit scripts on time, he'd often be asked to edit them on the spot in order to accommodate last-minute changes during production. Because of the high demand, he'd always find himself running away and hiding himself from Toei executives. Whenever someone from production would call his home and they find he wasn't there, they'd lash out at his wife, complaining to her about Igami. Eventually he'd experience burnout as a writer, and he began missing deadlines, causing a lot of problems for production for many shows. Igami took on all this work because he knew that stopping meant he'd stop getting paid. Back then, scriptwriters didn't earn any royalty for the rebroadcasting of these shows, so he had no choice but to do whatever work was offered, even if it meant biting on more than he could chew. And things got uglier. Whenever someone asked him where he was with a script, he'd throw an excuse at them, saying he needed more time because his father died, or his mother died, until he killed every one of his family in his fake excuses. Of course, nobody believed him. He'd bury himself in his work, to the point where he ignored his family. According to Inoue, his father was almost never home. He spent most of his free time seeing his mistress or getting drunk at bars. The times he did come home, he spent fighting with Inoue's mother, but despite his behavior, Inoue's mother still harbored affection for Igami, even though she knew about his mistress. If you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with some of Inoue's works, and how he depicts romantic relationships, often inserting love triangles into many children's programming. It could just be a coincidence, but I think much of Inoue's scenarios stem from observing his parents' relationship, how his mother would sit at home waiting for him, while his father escaped home in order to avoid his responsibilities as a husband and father, and as a scriptwriter. Inoue was 11 by the time the very first Kamen Rider aired. Like many kids his age, he was a huge fan of the show. Igami often gifted him Kamen Rider merchandise. While he didn't get to know his father since he only came home about once a month, he did get to learn about his writing through these shows. And before he knew it, he would soon follow in his footsteps to becoming a writer himself. But Inoue didn't learn to write like Igami, but rather, he observed him as if he were a subject for his own writing. He thought his father's writing was too conventional and too old-fashioned, and unwilling to experiment outside of his comfort zone, much like his father himself. When he was observing his father, he decided to look into his secret life. He found his father's best friend and got some information regarding his mistress. While he didn't get to meet her personally before she died, he did get to see a photo of what she looked like. and his father's mistress looked exactly like Inoue's mother, which disappointed Inoue because he thought his own father lacked imagination, knowing he'd only go for women who looked identical to each other. By the early 80s, Igami's work came to a stop as the henshin boom had run its course. Nobody wanted him anymore, but instead of returning home, he made pretend he had work by hiding out somewhere and continuing to drink. Inoue knew what his father was up to. I'm pretty sure everyone in his family knew, but Inoue wasn't concerned about his father's health, but rather how he continued to finance their house for the next few years. Inoue learned that his father mortgaged their own home, and his mother had to beg her parents for the money to pay back this debt. But that wasn't the end of their financial issues, because old habits die hard. Igami continued to collect loans from other places in order to feed his vices. His alcoholism eventually landed him in the hospital, where he would be diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver caused by his alcohol consumption over the years. Shortly before Igami died, he asked his wife if she wanted him to die, and despite her feelings for him, she responded, "I'm not sure." As the oldest, Inoue became the breadwinner of the family. You see, by the time his father died, Inoue himself was already 10 years into his scriptwriting career, starting with his debut work in the Dr. Slump anime in 1981, after being discovered by one of Toei's main staff. He would then contribute to many notable anime series including Dragon Ball. While the henshin boom died, the anime boom had just started, and eventually, Inoue would land his biggest work at the time that would elevate his career to new heights when he became the main writer for Chojin Sentai Jetman, an installment in the long-running Super Sentai series, and one of the last shows from the henshin boom that was in danger of being cancelled. Jetman was so popular, it saved the Super Sentai franchise from being cancelled. Now, I'm not going to name every work Inoue has done, but I want to talk a little about Inoue himself. Unlike his father, Inoue is high-key arrogant and yet pleasant to be around. He's been described as having a sort of god complex by some of his peers. One of the series planners who worked with him on the Dr. Slump anime said that if he wasn't cocky, then he'd be just a boring old man. At Toei, he gives off a completely different energy, a complete 180 from his father. Inoue would have a healthy working relationship with Toei, and they offered him plenty of work as a writer for Kamen Rider, just like his father, each work having its own kind of Inoue energy. When Super Sentai was supposedly in danger of being cancelled again, Toei called Inoue to return to write the 2022 Super Sentai series, Avataro Sentai Dawn Brothers, his first Super Sentai series in over 30 years. According to producer Shinichiro Shirakura, he asked Inoue to go full Inoue when penning the story. And the Inoue family of writers don't end there. His own daughter, Akiko Inoue, would also follow in his footsteps as a writer. She grew up wanting to write novels, and she got to write the Kamen Rider Decade novel. And shortly after finishing that novel, she got to write the novel version of Futare wa Precure, which led to her writing some episodes for Witcher Precure. And just this past year, she also got to write an episode for the 2024 series Kamen Rider Gotchard. While Igami wasn't the best family man, in fact he was pretty horrible, I like to think that only the best parts about him was passed on to his kids, and now his granddaughter. And I'm sure that he'd be happy to know that his family is okay, and that the Inoue family continues to write Kamen Rider into the new eras.